This portion just goes over the disassembly of the valve and actuators. Number one instruction is always relieve pipeline pressure and close the valve. That's the most important thing when working on any valve actuator combination, whether it be a manual, electric motor. Always make sure you know where that plug is and know there's no pressure in the line. We'll just do a quick note on this. So this is hydraulically removing the lower bearing. It's something that may or may not have to be done. If this valve is installed with the plug vertical, if you're dealing with a lot of solids or fine grit or sand, what happens is this lower bearing will end up getting egg-shaped over time, whether, depending on how thick it is. It could be 10 years, it could be 20. But to remove that lower bearing, you fill the lower journal with grease, use a shaft the same diameter of the ID of the bearing, hit your shaft a couple times with a hammer. It'll hydraulically press that bearing right out of there, and you install a new one from the factory. To install the new one, set your bearing in square, put a piece of flat stock on it and tap it in. You want to be gentle on it because you don't want to damage the new bearing. In the back of the instruction manuals, there's some troubleshooting things to look at. If you have packing leaks, how to adjust or what's the cause. The packing is loose or worn. I've seen worn packing after years of operation or dirty operation. If you got a lot of solids in the packing or in the line, they'll slowly work themselves up into the packing. And then with the packing is worn, that's not only wearing the packing, it's also wearing the upper journal of the plug. You can either clean it up with a wire wheel, reinstall it. Your packing may take that issue away, your packing leak, or you may have to get a new plug from the factory. Valve does not close. Obviously there's an object wedged in between the plug and the seat. Sometimes this can be fixed by just opening and closing the valve to try to flush the object. If that does not work, you'll either have to remove the plug from the valve body or remove the whole valve from the line. Actuator closed position is out of adjustment. Adjust the close stops on the actuator, whether it be backing them out or running them in a little farther. The valve leaks when closed. These two kind of go hand in hand. The plug is worn or damaged and the rubber on the plug is tore. Replace plug, see disassembly section. This covers the manual G-series actuators used on the PEC eccentric plug valves. Once again, table of contents, description, operation, required tools. We're going to go over the actuator removal. The lubrication, the actuators are lubricated at the factory for life of operation. Once again, the only time you'll have to add lubrication is if you remove this actuator for maintenance or service. Actuator removal for pause it. We're going to cover the non-submerged service actuators, the removal. Once again, discontinue flow and relieve pipeline pressure. This is the most important step you can do. A lot of people don't do it, and then they end up having issues with the valve orientation. Scribe corresponding lines on all the valve and actuators. Prior to disassembly, I even scribe a line on the plug in between the packing gland and the bottom of the actuator. This allows you to reinstall everything properly when you go to put it back together. If you do not have the lines, your orientation of your plug could be 30 degrees off and that valve will never close. Just goes through the quick instructions. The most important thing is to scribe your lines and to relieve pressure in the line. You can go through the O&Ms and they'll describe how to remove the actuator reinstall. On top of the actuator, this is the stud that goes through the actuator into the upper journal of the plug. It's got these Belleville washers on them along with a lock nut. When you reinstall that lock nut, compress them Belleville washers flat and then back it off a turn and a half. What those do is retain that plug in the body uptight so it's not in the lower journal, possibly causing leakage or damage from any of the media inside getting into the lower journal. Recommended spare parts. Each O&M has a list of things that you can or cannot keep on stock. With these G-series actuators, along with a basic smaller plug valve, anywhere from 4 to 10 inch, those are pretty common. We have parts on the shelf and most of the time readily available. Now we're going to cover the Dezurik nut and lever actuator as we described in our drawing previously. In all the instruction manuals, they have a Dezurik part section. On each of the valve, you'll find a silver and black Dezurik tag. You're going to look for the Dezurik part number. It's a 7-digit part number and a 4-digit revision number. An example is all 9s R00 located on the data plate attached to the valve assembly. It works best for Dezurik field service if you have that number and if you can as well have the work order number that's next to it on the tag. If you do not have the work order number, that's fine. The part number will be just fine. What that allows us to do is to pull up that 9 million number, enter it in the computer, and print out the bill of material, and we're then looking at the exact same thing you have. We'll be able to tell if there's ever been any revisions to it, anybody's ever added a part, taken parts off of it. We can see how that valve shipped out of the factory. Once again, Dezurik service information. You can either call Dezurik directly or you can go to our website. That'll give you all the information you'll need along with any contact information you may need. Open and close stop positions, we went over that on the drawings along with removing the actuator and installing it. Here's just a brief definition of what it is. The open position stop is a socket head cap screw and nut located in the slot in the gland. To change the stop setting, loosen the nut, slide the screw to the desired stop location, then tighten the nut. The one thing about a nut operated actuator, if you set the open stop at 50%, there is nothing that's going to hold that valve at 50%. It's not a modulating type valve, it's an open close. So if you set it at that 50%, there's a chance that the valve could slam shut and possibly wreck your system or cause water hammer. The close stop is determined by torquing the valve plug into the seat to set the close position stop. Turn the close position stop screw counterclockwise several turns. Torque the plug into the seat to the torque specified in Table C. Then turn the close position stop screw clockwise until it contacts the adapter. The thing about trying to close the valve, the plug too tight into the seat, is you could cause improper wear to that plug, shortening its life. Removing the actuator, once again, scribe a line on the wrenching nut, packing gland and valve to make sure it gets properly reassembled. Lift the wrenching nut off the plug stem after removing the nut. Make sure to collect all your Belleville washers. Slide your 2-inch nut assembly up. That allows you access to the gland. Remove the gland bolts. Lift your gland off, and that'll, if you want to replace your packing, that'll be the perfect time to do it. This position would be, this instruction manual would be more beneficial for the electricians on site. This is for Dezurik switch and position transmitter. There's several different versions. On this job site for this order, you have more of the mechanical switches. It gives a description of the position transmitter, the electrical connections, mechanical switches. Once again, Dezurik always sets the top switch for the closed position and the bottom switch for the open. This is a brief description of a position transmitter, a pot, how to set it. Here's how the position feedback switch is adapted to get mounted to the valve. Underneath this screw A5, there'll be that's your stud that gets mounted to the upper journal of the plug. There'll be a square adapting block in here along with the jam nut. You want to make sure that those two assemblies are tight and that jam nut is working correctly. This drives that switch open and close, hits the top switch, tells the position, hey, I'm full closed. Hits the bottom, I'm full open. That's what comes back up to the SCADA screen for the 4 to 20 feedback. We'll cover the stone L switches along with that adapter piece when more of the hands-on. Now we're going to cover the electric motor operator portion, the drawings of it. This is an AMA electric motor operator with an AMA gearbox for use with the larger PEC valves. This will cover the 4 to 12 inch with the SA10 GS80 gearbox motor actuator with an integral disconnect switch. The only thing you'll need to ever do on this actuator is if you have to adjust the open and close limits, adjust torque for the valve, or if you want to close the valve or have it not close as far. Right here, there's 4 screws on this end cap of the gearbox. That allows you to adjust the mechanical stops of the valve. Remove the 4 screws out of this cover. That allows you to get to the limit switches and the torque settings. We'll get into these a little bit more. Other than that, Dezurik and AMA encourages not to mess around anything internally. If you do have moisture that gets into this actuator, on top of this cover, you'll see that there is a position indicator arrow, and you'll see moisture condense on that arrow. If you have that, contact AMA or Dezurik as soon as possible so we can rectify the situation. You do not want water to build up in that electric motor. It will wreck it. This is the smaller manual gear for the same AMA actuator. Once again, here's the mechanical close limit, closed switch, or mechanical close nut for that AMA gearbox. Position indicator, hand wheel, disconnect. Here's a drawing of a variety of sizes of Dezurik plug valves, anywhere from a 3.5 inch up to a 20 inch. This is just a slight breakdown of the layout of the bonnet bolts on a 6 inch. On an 18 to 20, you got 2 different bolt circles. Here's your bonnet bolts. Here's your G series or adapters for use with a motor. Separate bolt circle, along with the 10 to 18 inch. You'll see that described as well. Here's just a slight breakdown of the plug valve again. You got your lower journal. This drawing depicts a greasert in the lower journal. On the top you have the gland, your packing, upper bearing, gasket, and your bonnet bolts. Here's a drawing of the connecting parts for a plug valve for use with an AMA actuator, AMA electric motor. Standard bonnet, standard adapter. You'll have an adapter plate with bolting from the bottom of the adapter into the plate, from the adapter plate into the AMA gearbox. An adapter drive sleeve with a 1/4-inch wrenching set screw. That set screw holds that adapter sleeve onto the plug journal. So in this application, if this actuator was flipped upside down, this drive sleeve could not slip, it would stay in place. This is a drawing of the 3 to 12-inch BAW valve. You have many of these on this site. You got your valve shaft, your disc, your seating area, lower plug, packing, and a keyway. On the Dezurik BAW valves, your Dezurik data tag will be on the most likely be on the flanges of the valve. So if you ever have an issue, you can call Dezurik with those numbers. Described in section AA in this top left corner is a set screw and how it pins the shaft to the disc edge. One on each side that drives that disc onto the shaft, not allowing the disc to move. This just describes the seating, how the disc edge meets with the valve seat. You'll see that it's a unidirectional valve, or it's a bidirectional closing operating valve, but it only seats on one side of the valve. It's not a unidirectional seat. Here's a Dezurik BAW valve for use with the AMA gearbox motor assembly. Once again, you got the valve neck, the boltings to the adapter, and then the adapter to the gearbox. This is displaying basically the same thing as the PEC. This is a BAW valve